0002032, and you can phone us on our telephone lines over there. Let's take a short sting. On the other side of that, we speak to Karen Morn.
You are listening to This Week Today on the Station of the Year.
Karen Morn, good evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for making yourself available. This is an important conversation. The Section 194 inquiry is the first time we've seen such an inquiry in South Africa. And since the inquiry started, this week was the first time Busisiwe Mkhwebane took to the stand as the suspended public protector to give her side of the story. Before we get into the substance of what was said, perhaps let's start with, I guess, the big picture question here is, why is this an important process?
Well, as you rightly point out, in South African history, we have literally not seen any form of impeachment process ever proceeding. And I don't even think in non-democratic history has that occurred. And so it obviously has massive implications. This is obviously for a Chapter 9 institution. But we also have the possibility of Judge President John Hlophe facing an impeachment vote in the National Assembly. And indeed, with these question marks over the Phala Phala report, which was rejected by a majority vote in Parliament, we may well see a scenario where we have a presidential impeachment process unfolding. So this process in and of itself will have implications going forward.
So on the substance of it, Busisiwe Mkhwebane took to the stand this past week, and Advocate Mkhwebane was asked about the CR17 report that she had put out, which the Constitutional Court, of course, set aside and slammed her about her sloppy investigative procedures. And I'm paraphrasing here, but that's effectively what the court said. The court found fault with how she went about the process, but she maintains the facts were not wrong.
Well, this is the fascinating thing. Busisiwe Mkhwebane has maintained throughout her attack on the impeachment inquiry process against her that the court rulings that informed these processes were, quote-unquote, merely opinions. And she has repeated that stance in this hearing. Now, we will, of course, remember that with CR17, unusually, unlike some of the other judgments that have been given against her, we have seen scenarios with minority judgments, but we saw a very strong minority judgment coming out from Chief Justice Mogoeng, who disagreed with his colleagues and said, that the public protector was entitled to investigate the president, and made quite harsh findings against Ramaphosa in terms of supporting her stance that he had put himself at the risk of some form of state capture with accepting these donations from various business people. Now, of course, the court in its majority had said that the public protector, the Executive Ethics Code, as it then was, we know it's in the process of being amended, did not allow the public protector to investigate private funding of particular individuals within inter-party contestation. But Mogoeng disagreed and ultimately said, that the president is the first citizen of the country. He needs to be accountable, and was extremely harsh in his judgment, which was really, indicative of his stance that the wrong approach had been taken. But we had seen Mogoeng in the past, for example, very strongly oppose the personal cost order that was given against the court's majority in the CX matter, against Mkhwebane, which is again one of the judgments that has informed these proceedings against her.
Yeah. The public protector's troubles, however, didn't start with the CR17 report. It started much earlier in 2017, right? With that Bancorp report, which also was overturned. Once again, it's where the court initially started calling her investigative procedures sloppy, effectively, that she doesn't understand the law and misapplied the relevant statutes. Has that at any point in the week come up yet?
That is one of the big cases, because it actually went further than that. Essentially what had happened, and we've had this coming out in drips and drabs during the proceedings, but essentially what had happened was, it was about 8 months into Busisiwe Mkhwebane coming into office. It's 2017. National Treasury is at war, or the Zuma administration is at war with National Treasury. We all remember that white monopoly capital rhetoric that was being flung at various people, including Pravin Gordhan, et cetera. And there was always this push to try and push forward with a Russian nuclear deal that was being hamstrung by the National Treasury. So it was a very, very fraught time. I mean, it's still a fraught time in South Africa. But she then comes out with this report that says essentially that the constitutional mandate of the Reserve Bank must be amended by Parliament. And she gives exact words, which we now know the vast majority of which she got from the State Security Agency. She said because she wanted to ensure economic stability. But that report sent the markets in South Africa into a tailspin because it was seen as an attack on the independence of the Reserve Bank at a time where National Treasury and these financial institutions were essentially at profound loggerheads with the Zuma administration over SSA, over the Russian nuclear deal, and over a whole bunch of other issues. So the fact that there had been a submission from Busisiwe Mkhwebane after witness evidence that indeed she did get wording from SSA because she wanted economic advice from SSA is going to be one of the major issues that she will have to address in her evidence.
Yeah. Also the fact that she didn't tell anyone of the other parties that she met with SSA.
And this is the point. This was the basis of the personal cost order that was given against her, the first that was ever given against the public protector, where the court said she had these meetings with the SSA which were not recorded and initially not disclosed in the initial processes, and also with the Zuma presidency over her release. And, that was a big basis for the court to say, there seems to be apparent dishonesty here. There seems to be, in terms of the processes that were followed, apparent bias. And that was the beginnings of this process that we now see taking place just months before her term actually in fact ends.
Yeah. Another contentious report, and you need to tell us if this came up at all, was the Ivan Pillay early retirement investigation that the public protector conducted and somehow managed to find within the same report that indeed a rogue unit existed, in her words, in that report. Those two issues featuring all the same in one report. The court too overturned that. But while the court did so, described her behavior also as scandalous, but described Pravin Gordhan's behavior as vexatious in the same report, which pointed to a very tense relationship between the public protector and the executive. And I think perhaps Pravin Gordhan was emblematic of perhaps the executive's attitude towards the public protector at the time, but the court slammed it nonetheless. So what was dubbed the Rogue Unit report too was a contentious one, and that was also overturned. And the incumbent acting public protector had said that she will not challenge the court ruling on that any further. Has that made an appearance yet?
So this is a fascinating thing, right? What is interesting is that in making her case for her defense, in her statement, Busisiwe Mkhwebane has come out and said, I am being unjustifiably persecuted because, as she puts it, I touched the untouchable. And she names them. She says President Cyril Ramaphosa, the Reserve Bank. She says the interests of business were affected by the Reserve Bank thing. And she has not yet explained, and I'm sure she'll be cross-examined on this, why she admitted in the initial interdict applications that in fact she'd made a mistake and she'd breached the principle of separation of powers by ordering Parliament to make that amendment. And then she says Pravin Gordhan. And in fact, Oliver, she issued 3 reports against Pravin Gordhan. The SARS Rogue Unit report, the Ivan Pillay early retirement report, and this recent report on an IT contract which was then invalidated because the incumbent public protector said, we are not going to waste time and money trying to defend the indefensible, essentially, that they had got legal advice. So one of the key aspects is that she essentially, the case that is being made is that essentially she pursued certain individuals who were seen as aligned to President Ramaphosa's faction, the president himself and Pravin Gordhan. And she has made it very clear within her defense that she regards them as kind of untouchables, and she believes that she is being unfairly targeted because she rightfully, on her version, held them to account. So we haven't heard from her on the SARS Rogue Unit report, but because of the evidence that, she has handed in an affidavit, she will address it. But there have been these continuous, these continuous question marks over some of the material, for example, that she based that report on. It was invalidated, like the classified, Inspector General Intelligence report, which she claimed that she'd had verified by the IGA, which conserved the so-called SARS rogue unit, and which the IGI has now come out and said, but we never verified that report. And in any event, you having possession of it was illegal. So this kind of specter of the SSA, state security, intelligence, at this full time where there's this war between Treasury and the Zuma administration, and then the repercussions going on into the Ramaphosa administration, where on some of the evidence led, there seems to be a concerted campaign against the president and Pravin Gordhan. That all sketches the landscape of why she has come out swinging and said that allegations that she essentially was a spy, which had been made by the DA in the past, are untrue, unfair, and that she's simply being persecuted because, quote unquote, she touched the untouchables.
Yeah. Karen, just moving on to a separate issue. And this is really just about the process itself and the configuration of this committee. Is this committee procedurally sound enough and structurally sound enough to be able to comb through and separate what are legal issues from political issues? Because the confluence of law and politics here seems to be ubiquitous. It happens throughout the process. But at some point, it will need to be separated in adjudication and when a report is compiled here. Is this committee, from your observation, capable of doing so?
Well, I mean, it's such a brilliant question, and I'm really glad you asked it, because she's made that case. She said the DA and the ANC have an unholy alliance, and if they, on her, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially if they cook up a basis for me to face an impeachment vote, that will definitely be overturned by a court, because according to her, no evidence has been led that would justify her impeachment. So she has taken the political aspect to this and said the ANC and the DA are colluding.
Yeah.
There's a clear, if you've watched these proceedings, the ATM very much in her corner, the EFF very much in her corner, the UDM very much in her corner. But those parties within this committee not having the majority to be able to make a dent, if there is a majority decision that yes, indeed, there is a basis of misconduct or incompetence or both that would justify an impeachment. But Oliver, the thing is, this is precedent setting. They have throughout this process been launching litigation. She recently launched litigation to force the recusal of the chair, Gul Dianti, and to force the recusal of Kevin Millihan, who is of course married to Natasha Mazzoni, the former chief whip who brought this motion in the first place. And there's been constant litigation, and we know, absolutely know, Oliver, that at the end of this, if there is a decision that she must face impeachment, she will challenge it in court. And there would then be a real question mark as to whether that vote happened. And if it doesn't happen before October, which is when her term ends, she can't necessarily, my understanding is legally speaking, she can't be impeached. So this is as much of it's a time thing, it's a politics thing, and it's, within our current dynamic, everything is shifting all the time, and the Phala Phala issue, I think, is hanging over this as well.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, we're waiting for the Constitutional Court to rule on whether it supports the Western Cape High Court's ruling that President Cyril Ramaphosa acted improperly by suspending Busisiwe Mkhwebane after she sent in those questions on Phala Phala.
Unless Busisiwe Mkhwebane can go to court and prove that the process is fraught, and perhaps even that there is procedurally she was faced with bias in this report, the actual outcome of the report can't be turned over in court. That perhaps just on a process the court may be able to intervene in, because the court is quite careful of imposing on parliamentary decisions, because there's a reason for separation of powers. Will she have what will the prospect of those success be, given that by the time that eventually may happen, her 7-year term would be over?
Well, I think this is a crucial question, because in many respects, one of the frustrations is that that there has been a kind of sense that in many respects the committee has bent over backwards to accommodate Busisiwe Mkhwebane. And oftentimes you sit in that hearing and it does have all the resemblance of like a hostage negotiation. And the people who've come in to give evidence against her, unfortunately, there has been an acrimony and a kind of antagonism, and often, quite, I would say, abrasive style of questioning, And it's not been in any way, shape, or form a kind of procedurally easy matter. But I think the committee throughout have had legal advisors saying, this is what, we're in a precedent-setting situation.
Yeah.
This is what we believe are the correct decisions to make. And where they have, made decisions that she's been opposed to, they've been careful to set out the bases for them. I mean, my personal reading is that I would be very surprised if the Western Cape High Court, for example, agreed with her that Deanti and Millihan must be forced to be removed. And I think you're absolutely right that unless there are profound procedural problems and that violate, the principles of the legality, because I would expect that they would bring a review, that the court would be very, very, very reluctant, as they have been in the past, to intervene in a parliamentary process. The other question, of course, is if this goes to a vote, given the schisms that exist with the ANC at the moment, are we guaranteed that we're going to see all those ANC members first voting in favor of an impeachment? Because my understanding is it's a 2/3 vote. So it's quite a tall order, and you might see a scenario where you go through that, you have the vote, but you don't necessarily have the numbers. And
Absolutely.
What are the implications of that?
And just lastly, when politicians, or in this case state actors, fight, it is lawyers that win on either side, because they laugh all the way to the bank. This process has been ongoing for months now. You may not actually know because it's never been disclosed, but there's a concern that this is an expensive process. The Public Protector's Office has already said that actually we can't afford to continue paying for this because we've got other actual investigations to fund, and this is costing us more than we had planned and anticipated for. But lawyers will still need to be paid, and it's effectively the taxpayer that's footing the bill here on either side once again. Is there any estimation anywhere out there, albeit perhaps undercounted, about how much this process has actually cost so far?
Well, I think, it was actually one of the issues that was raised by Advocate Mpofu and Nkobane this week, where she actually made the submission that this entire process was a waste of time and money, and that it had been an extraordinary waste of money because of the time that it had taken, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We know that initially, in terms of her legal, but this was many, many months ago. Like, in terms of her legal challenges to the process, it stood at about 14 million rand. But now, but that was right at the beginning. This is not taking into account the day rates of all the advocates. So that's just in relation to that Constitutional Court impeachment challenge, where she, the Con Court confirmed that she was entitled to legal representation, but overturned the Western Cape High Court ruling which said a judge should not be involved in the initial preliminary investigation. But you are correct. The Public Protector's Office is, I think Dali and Mpofu at one stage, I stand to be corrected, said, it could at least be 100 million rand. But he said that it was running into, they themselves have raised this issue. They've said that this is an expensive exercise that should never have happened, because they at this moment are again raising issues about the procedurality of what's happened.
Yeah.
And it is, the unfortunate thing is and this comes from the time of the TRC, right? We as a country have a profound problem with accountability. And we haven't developed the mechanisms to make sure that because of what we come from, we don't end up in processes that are essentially held hostage for people who are facing potentially the consequences of their own actions. And we saw a scenario where someone like FW de Klerk, for example, came to the TRC and said, I know nothing about these state-sanctioned murders of the Craddock Poor. Yeah. Meanwhile, he's sitting on the State Security Council. TRC ends. No members of the apartheid executive, including P.W. Botha, refuses to come, are ever held accountable for what appears evidently to have been state-sanctioned murders of black activists. And that just goes under the carpet. We see, like 300-odd cases recommended by the TRC that the NPA doesn't prosecute. The NPA is now in a situation where it's being forced by the courts to launch some kind of investigation into allegations of political interference that blocked it. And that is extremely important for us understanding what happened. But what it did to our democracy, this culture of non-accountability, this culture of, extreme resistance to any form of being questioned, being asked to explain yourself, I think has had a staggering and damaging impact on us. And I think that it's very important that this exercise is happening, but it really is throwing up these issues that we have as a democracy with asking people in a perfectly reasonable way to be accountable for their own conduct and to explain it without resorting to the kind of insults, abuse, expensive litigation that we've seen playing out in this scenario, and I would argue also in terms of the former president's corruption case.
Absolutely. Karen, thank you so much for your time and your valuable insights. It really has been an honor and a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Oliver.
Have a fantastic one. Karen Moore, senior legal reporter at Media 24. Send me a voice note, 086 000 2032. Well, call me on that number, 086 000 2032. I'm taking your voice notes on 0614 104 107. Make sure that those voice notes are short, and that you turn off the radio and so that we can hear you and not myself or anything else. Otherwise, Lisego won't play them. Keep them under a minute. Sweet and short, under a minute would be very, very helpful. 0614 104 107. That's our WhatsApp line to which you can send those voice notes. Again, if you want to give us a call, it is 086 000 2032. Let's take a quick short break. On the other side of that, we speak to Leeto Ndoba.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAfm 105.7 FM in Cape Town. Stay tuned to SAfm coming up. You are listening to Oliver Dickson on the Station of the Year.
5 Zamazamas were killed execution style in the Free State in Virginia on Tuesday, and police said that they were informed of the fatal shooting at the Central Plant Mine premises. Now, Zamazama killings are all the more common. In fact, it is commonplace, almost a daily occurrence. But what is interesting here is how the police seems to have thrown in the towel, despite making, winning certain ground in certain instances. The police seem to have warned communities in particular not to interact with these people, not to speak to these people, because they're dangerous. They got guns and they will kill you, despite the fact that police officers often make very big busts, so to speak, should they successfully coordinate one with private security, with crime intelligence, and with the tactical response team. But nonetheless, community members are living in fear. But more importantly, it is Zamazamas that are dying. And these seem to happen very specifically at abandoned mines. South Africa is filled with abandoned mines. And when we say abandoned mines, I really, really do not understand what that means. Does it mean the thing doesn't have an owner? Does it mean that the owners abdicated and ran away and they can't be found? Or does it mean that the mine that operated there just forgot about it? And like a forgotten house, other people moved in? Leeto Ndoba is a lecturer at the Central University of Technology, is with us for this conversation. Leeto, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, man. What on earth is an abandoned mine?
Right. So an abandoned mine in South Africa is a relative term. So there are two types of mines that have been, in inverted commas, abandoned. The first kind is a mine that operates. So in the legal term, let's take the legal term for a mine that's been closed. When you close a mine, you have to rehabilitate the land, which costs somewhere upwards of 50 to 100 million rand in order to rehabilitate the place so that when you leave it sort of like you got it when you arrived there. So the foreign investors and the mining companies have figured out that to do that is more expensive. So what they do is they then go and see what are the minimum requirements for a mine to stay open, in inverted commas. And to stay open, what you need is a mine manager, a CFO, and 2 secretaries. And then you need a skeleton crew of 150 people. When that happens, the mine can remain open, even though the mine isn't really producing much. And so what when you say abandoned mine, when you're usually saying an abandoned mine, you are mentioning the second part, the mine that's running on a skeleton crew, basically.
So there's an abandoned mine that's running on a skeleton crew so that they don't have to pay the 50 million rand that they have to 100 million rand to spend that kind of money to rehabilitate. It's cheaper to keep 10 people on payroll and pretend like it's a mine, or even though it's not operational. But then there are also unrehabilitated mines. Do we have a lot of those, which is a mine with no staff, no operations, and are unrehabilitated, left completely for the demise, to, I guess, for the free entry for all Zamazamas?
No, those don't exist. So what happens with the Zamazamas, right? The way the Zamazamas enter the mine is not through the main shaft. So what you used to see is with a gearhead and basically an elevator that goes down into the belly of the earth, right? They don't go through that side. When they dug out the mines in sort of the early stages of mining in South Africa, they would dig the main shaft. So they would sink the main shaft, and on the other side they would make an escape shaft in case the table, that's what they call it, would collapse behind you, so you would have an escape shaft. So then in the colloquialisms of the mines, it's called Madala side. So what happens is the illegal miners go through the Madala side. They don't go through the main shaft. So they would rather go through the Madala side, the escape shaft, or they would also use the ventilation system to sort of crawl down. So the ventilation system would exit air sort of kilometers down from where the main shaft is. So they would use that to sort of crawl their way down into the abandoned parts of the shaft. So the abandoned parts of the shaft are the parts that are no longer mined. So it's no longer profitable to go there and mine, because the mine that is there is of a lower purity. So you still get gold there, but you might find that it's at 60 or 50% or 40% purity, whereas in South Africa they're used to 90% purity and above. Sure.
Then let's talk about matters pertaining to safety. Why is it that mines where Zamazamas have control or are operating in, the area around it becomes so unsafe?
So because the issue is, people assume that Zamazamas are just individuals. So it's just Oliver and Leeto trying to go and get a bit of gold, to get some money, to get some food. But then what happens is quickly they develop into cartels. And then what you have is groups of foreign nationals mixed in with South Africans. And so you will have Basotho crews, you will have Shona crews, you will have South African crews mixed in with Shonas. And so what happens is then those crews would want to dominate parts of the shaft. And so they are not in agreement with who should be mining where. And that's where the guns come in. And they don't just fight in the mine itself physically, they also fight outside the mine. So you have two types of fights that happen. You have a fight where they're underground. So when we are underground and I see Oliver has gotten more gold ore than me, I can just throw him down the shaft and kill him that way.
Yeah.
Or we could suffocate on the methane. On the other side, we fight in the township. So the problem with the township is it's the jurisdiction of the South African police. So what the illegal miners now have figured out is that if I kill you in the township and go drop off your body on the mine premises, then the South African police play fast and loose with the private property name and leave it up to the private mining security to then take it up with the police, and then it becomes a much longer process.
Yeah. So these turf wars, effectively, it's turf wars like in the drug business. Am I understanding that correct?
Yes, it is a turf war like in the drug business, but now the turf war is between sort of smuggling routes for how the gold leaves the mine, but also the money around it. Because remember, these people are not using the banking facility. So you find somebody sitting around with 500,000 rand, 300,000 rand in a shack. Yeah. And so then that's where the guns, the territorial wars, and just the interpersonal beefs come in.
At how much risk is the community?
the community is at a reasonably heightened risk because remember, these men have guns, right? And there have been instances where men would get drunk, be in a tavern and would like two girls. If the girls don't like them back, they'd follow the girls home and shoot them. There was a case like that in Welkom, I think, last year in August.
Wow.
They just followed this girl home and they shot her in front of her parents, in front of the gate. And so those are things that would happen. So it's not just territorial wars, but that gun that these people have has become a tool to subdue the community around them with fear and intimidation.
Yeah. And Leto, to what, and then, actual deaths in the shafts are also quite of concern. Zamazamas dying underground. How often and how big is that of a problem?
It's a very big problem. So if you die in the shaft, either one of two things happen. Either you are with your Zamazama friends who would try to get you out, or you die in a place where it's too dangerous to go get you out. And that is where even the Zamazamas themselves contact the mine so that they can get their safety officers and see if they can't go get you out, because it becomes the prerogative of the mine and the safety officers to get dead bodies out, whether it's Zamazamas or not. And so it's a very weird gray area, especially when there's a dead body in a mine, right? And so the issue then becomes who takes responsibility of the dead body. And at times, if your friends do take you out of the shaft, I'm still trying to find gold. So even if my friend Oliver has passed on, I'm just going to leave your body out in the sun where the security, if they're patrolling, can see your body, pick it up and try to call the police and the embassy they think you might come from.
Yeah. And importantly, does crime intelligence, state security, and the police know what to do?
They relatively don't know what to do. So the only way to know that there's Zamazama action in your area is not necessarily because they are underground, because the police and everyone, even mining security, don't have the resources to go underground and look for these people, because the tunnels we are talking about in these mines that are in places like in the Free State, in Welkom, span kilometers, can sometimes span the whole town.
Yeah.
And so you don't have the resources to go and look for them. So what happens is, the crime intelligence traces the food and the entertainment that goes to them. So for a place like Welkom, for instance, and I know we've discussed this, you can't go to Nando's and buy more than 20 full chicken. So you can't go to Nando's and buy full chickens. Apparently, it's one of the favorite meals of the Zamazamas, Nando's. So here, if you go and you go to a Nando's and say, can I have 20 full chickens, you'll have police on you before you leave the premises of Nando's. But that's the only way you try to catch them. And with fraudulent alcohol purchases, when they buy huge pallets to go sell to the Zamazama. So they actually trace the people who run the underground spaza shops more than they trace the Zamazamas themselves.
Yeah. And just as a broad question here, because this is the difficult question to answer. What part of the value chain of this must you disrupt for this entire industry to come to its knees? And this industry, I mean the Zamazama illegal mining industry. Because really the ultimate fight would be to end this industry in its entirety. And it must be interrupted at a crucial part of the value chain. Which part of the value chain is most vulnerable and where our intelligence should be focused on?
In that regard, there are three parts where I've identified what might be vulnerability. So the first part is the food and entertainment value chain. In Welkom, they did manage to sort of curb a lot of the activity by trying to cut off the food, to cut off the entertainment, with these sort of rules about what you can't buy at certain wholesalers, at certain stores without certain permissions and permits, right? And when you do that, the South Africans that run the underground spaza shops can't get the food to these illegal miners. The second place you can cut it off is how they transport the gold out of South Africa. So the gold is just processed here, but it goes through the borders, mainly through Botswana and Mozambique. And most recently, it started to go through Zimbabwe again, which was a route that was previously shut down because of the economics of Zimbabwe. But it seems there is a revitalization of the route through Zimbabwe, and then it goes through Namibia. Right? And so the border control would be a major one. And the police that guard the border seem to be part of the bigger problem, right? And then the last part is how these Zamazamas actually come into the country themselves, because most of them go through places like Vicksburg and Bethlehem and don't go through the border, especially the ones that come from Lesotho, for example. They don't go through the border with their passports. And so without that proper border management and deciding what jurisdiction falls where, that becomes the problem. Because the problem, the way the South Africans and the Lesotho police handled the issue of stock theft in the border regions, where jurisdiction had to fall away in order for us to control the problem, because the stock thieves knew that if you come to South Africa, steal cattle and then just rustle them over to Lesotho, then you are out of the jurisdiction of South Africa. And so that had to fall away for stock theft. And I think something similar must start to happen for the prosecutions to take root in South Africa when these people are caught. Because the first thing, when they are caught, because they have no identifying documents from South Africa, they have no passports, you can just deport them. And when you deport them home, all they have to do is to walk to Vicksburg or walk to Bethlehem, and they're back into South Africa on a taxi to Welkom again.
My goodness. Leeto, thank you so much for your time, and really, really do appreciate it. Leeto Ntoba, lecturer at Central University of Technology. Shoot us a call, 086 000 2032, 086 000 2032. We're also taking your WhatsApp voice notes on our WhatsApp line on 0614 104 107. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side of this, we continue the show.
SAfm, leading the conversation. You are listening to Oliver Dickson on the Station of the Year.
Every person, no matter who you are, what music you're inclined to listen to, and what you do with your weekends, you need a weekend playlist. That musical mix of music that accompanies the lazy weekends, whether catching up with friends and family or just taking some time to reflect. Tune in to The Soundtrack of Your Life with me, Ernest Pillay, Saturdays and Sundays, 1 to 4 on SAfm.
This week today, Fridays, 6 to 7 p.m.
Tanzania's President Suluhu Hassan, she was in South Africa on a state visit to President Cyril Ramaphosa. Bilateral visits, there are a lot of them these days. Well, the calendar is filled with them. Are an important part of political activity in geopolitics, because what it does is it establishes and strengthens ostensibly relationships between countries. Oftentimes countries would have spent months, sometimes years, with various of their corresponding departments negotiating certain treaties, negotiating certain bilateral agreements, negotiating certain cooperation between each other. And once those negotiations are largely, by and large, complete, you would see a bilateral visit happening where the two countries with their executives sign those agreements into order. And usually that is a big, important symbolic ceremony, because ongoing discussions do happen in those instances. Sometimes it's just a friendly visit, really just a courtesy visit. Do you just say, hey, we're here, we like you, we're your friend, and we want to continue having open conversations with you? And the symbolism thereof is to open the door for conversations between corresponding institutions within the two countries to continue having those conversations, or at least to start having those conversations. But how significant was this particular visit? I'm now joined on the line to discuss this with me, Nixon Katembo. Nixon is the African Affairs Analyst and Executive Producer at Channel Africa's Kiswahili's desk. Nixon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Oliver. Good evening to SAfm listeners.
Nixon, how significant was this visit?
This visit is very significant in 2 or 3 more aspects. One, South Africa and Tanzania enjoy historical relations, of which, of course, we know that many of the freedom fighters were hosted by Tanzania during the dark days of apartheid here in the country, and many sought refuge in their country. And the president at the time, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, gave refuge to those who were fleeing persecutions and those who were trying to seek to liberate this country from the yoke of apartheid colonialism.
Yeah.
So that is one aspect. The second aspect is looking at the trade relation between the two countries. It is increasing year by year. For example, last year, in the past, since 2020 to up to 2023, now the last statistics shows that Tanzania exports stands at 916.7 million in 2021 alone. Those are exports to African names, or in terms of agriculture produce. Here in the country, we consume much of Tanzania's cashew nuts, including avocados and many other agriculture products. But not only that, also on the economic front, such as mining. South Africa is a mining country, but Tanzania equally is a mining country, and much of the gold of Tanzania is being refined here in South Africa, then sold to the rest of the world, according to the trade information that we have so far from both countries. So what is South Africa doing in Tanzania? We look about over 250 South African companies invested in various sectors in Tanzania, from telecommunication to tourism to steel production, as well as communication. Vodacom, for one, is one of the largest telecommunication company in Tanzania.
Yeah.
So there is really that kind of trade engagement between, and increasing trade volume between the two countries. But the third one is giving this political historical relations, the people-to-people engagement in Tanzania is increasingly at the same level. You have just one particular example from if you look at the social demographic composition, for example, the Angunis in Tanzania, whereas the Angunis here in South Africa, you have a sort of who share sort of a kind of a cultural ties. Some of which are not spoken of mostly. So it is in this kind of background that the officials from both countries have continued to strengthen political, economic, and diplomatic ties. But not only that, Tanzania and South Africa share common interest in terms of international politics and the regional politics. Whereas if you look at the issues of peace and security, both countries have deployed in Mozambique under SAMIM, and both countries have their forces in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo under the United Nations Force Intervention Brigade, which actually first dislodged the first M23 war in 2013. So there is a myriad of engagement between the two countries, and by the way, both countries are founding members of SADC, Southern African Development Community, and for Tanzania is very strategic in a way that it also is a founding member of the East African Community, but both countries also have a maritime coastline that is strategic for trade.
Were there any key bilateral conversations that were taking place in, maximizing what is already part of the trade relation, of the political relation?
I think the more is about increasing the trade engagement. Now that the discussions around the issues of African free trade area is looking at increasing investment opportunities for both countries, for Tanzanian businesses to invest more into Africa as the largest and most industrialized nation on the continent, but also for Tanzania to invest in these countries and learning also some of the best practices of a successful business in this country, and also making sure that the flow of trade volumes are happening without much of some of the challenges such as tariff barriers and so on. So it's in this context that countries which have signed a special relationship, or what they call binational commissions, because this is a high top tier level of diplomacy or diplomatic engagement for countries to engage in, because that shows the level of importance of their relations in both political and economic arena.
Yeah, and just finally, Nixon, President Hassan is due to host end of this month the Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris. That too will be a significant state visit because it will establish a very strong relationship between Tanzania as well as the USA, but also it will be important for the geopolitical alignment of the region with America as a trade partner. What is expected to come out of that visit?
I think that the visit is a part of the broader strategy of the Americans trying to cajole some of the African countries in a way in the wake of what is happening, shifting geopolitical nature of trade and diplomatic relations in the current context of the world. So for instance, Tanzania has historical ties with China, and it seems to be changing under the current president, Samia Suluhu Hassan. That at one point Tanzania was very instrumental, by the way, in getting China on the United Nations Security Council, to the extent that the then president of the United States called the head of diplomacy at the time, Dr. Salim Mohammed Salim, and the Tanzanian delegation as monkeys. And this is not often spoken about, but I think from Kamala Harris's visit, it's in a way of a high diplomatic drive to kind of deal with China in a way that, and making sure that it reduces China's influence in the region. Tanzania is not escaping from America's current diplomatic charm of faces. You would see that many of American officials now have seen a continent in as much as during the Trump era. It's sort of they had a kind of this go slow approach. Yeah. So this has an important aspect in terms of South Africa's relations with Tanzania, because South Africa is the current chair of BRICS, and you know that BRICS with China and Russia in the mix, as well as India, there will always be those greater power contestations among countries, and making sure that whoever goes on the term offensive to have influence in the region. So it's not surprising that Kamala Harris is coming in this context, and that will have a significance on how Tanzania relate with the other members in the region, particularly South Africa.
Nixon, thank you so much for your time. So we're going to have to leave it there. Nixon Kantembo, who is with Channel Africa, leaving us over there. Let me play these quick voice notes for you as we close off the show.
Hi, Oliver. Well, the case that have been are said to be against the untouchables, and interestingly, all of them are against her favor, without getting into the merits of the case. All of those cases were referred to her. They didn't go fishing for them, targeting them. They were referred to her.
Yeah, Oliver, I concur with Public Protector when she says she touched the untouchable. You touch white people in South Africa, you will know them. I can bear testimony on that. You touch white people in this country, you are digging your own grave. I know from experience, and I know her feelings. I share her feelings. It is not a joke, it is a reality. You touch white people in South Africa, you will know them because they own everything.
And that brings us to the end of the show. From myself, Lisego, as well as Lal. It's been fantastic. We're back with you next week. Tabiso Mosias up next.
Independent and impartial. This is SAfm News.
Minister confirms DNA is not that of convicted murderer and arrest warrant issued for Putin. Good evening to you. The Police Minister Beck Gales confirmed the DNA from a burnt body believed to be that of convicted rapist and murderer Thabo